So hello everyone and welcome to the second Africa region webinar. Pleased to see so many of you join into this call. We've got two great key presentations for you today. So we have Adrian Paris, the president of BOHS, giving an important update from BOHS. And we also have Tomas Gabor, who will be giving a really interesting presentation on microbiological sampling. So we've got a very full packed agenda. If there's time at the end, I'll talk about the new reduction in benzene OELs and the WHO climate change report on heat stress. But we may run out of time by then. So that's what we're going to cover. Hopefully wrap it up within the hour. Any questions that you have, please leave them to the end of the presentation. We'll take questions at the end of each presentation. So now I'll hand over to Adrian Paris. Thank you, Adrian.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Thanks for inviting me along to give the presentation on the key updates through BOHS. There's lots of exciting things going on currently at the moment, and I've just pulled together some slides to give you sort of a snippet of the key things. So can I have the next slide, please? So I plan to work through sort of education qualifications, something on professional standards governance and the competency framework, with a bit on technical guidance update, and follow with a sort of summary of key strategic work that's ongoing. So start off with education and qualifications. So the faculty have currently gone through a review of the syllabi for the M series modules. So these were formerly the W500 series courses, and we've done a review to bring them in line with the new BOHS competency framework. This was updated a couple of years ago. Substantial work was done on the competency framework, and now we're just realigning our training material to that. As part of that process, we have consulted with the training providers, got their input and feed into that syllabi change, and these updates will include general updates on development of new science and sort of technology, inclusion of some new material, and we're hoping to publish all that by the end of the year. So watch out for that coming your way. So following on for that, then there'll be updated the manuals, which are expected to be released then new year to align then to the syllabi. One of the key developments really was around the M200 education module, which covers the broad scope of occupational hygiene as an introductory topic. Now we've seen this as a fairly key thing to give people a broad understanding of occupational hygiene and the discipline. So we're actually doing a review of the contents of that module currently, and we're hoping to make it available more broadly. So we're going to break it down into individual modules and make that available online for people to sit at their own pace and speed, and we're hoping also to do that at minimal cost as well, so it gives that module access to the maximum amount of people. So next slide, please. And the other key update is the diploma review. So we took a step back, went out to sort of consultation, got some feedback on the diploma qualifications, and then undertook a sort of formal review. The key part of the review really is to try and encourage more people to head down the diploma route, but also to provide that extra support that people feel the need to tackle that sort of qualifications. Is recognising that for a lot of people that there's quite a substantial gap between the certificate and diploma. So really, so people come at it cold. So the key for us was really to provide that support and guidance moving into that qualification. So that the guidance has been reviewed, and they're the five that you can see in front of you. It's substantial guidance support in each step of the diploma. But the other key development is around diploma days, which we've started to run. I think we've run 2 in the UK currently. And they're really peak time to get people together interested in doing the diploma, learn more about it, provided some extra guidance, provide opportunity to practice professional discussions, and really get to the nitty-gritty to prepare people for the examination ahead. So I think it's a significant step forwards, and we have got a lot of people interested currently that's working way through those diploma days. So hopefully we should see a good uptake of people wanting to move towards diploma and chartered status as an occupational hygienist. And another recent development is around master's program. So we're struggling specifically in the UK to sustain masters in higher education. So we're currently looking and developing plans for BOHS to provide a distant learning master's program, just really to make sure that we've got that sustainable education route in the UK. So next slide, please. And the other key development, if you haven't heard so far, is the steps towards BOHS becoming a registered profession, occupational hygiene become a registered profession in the UK. So this has been a number of communications around that recently, and people may be aware of the occupational hygiene register that's been created. So the exciting thing around that is now sort of occupational hygiene has in the UK has its equivalent status as of doctors and lawyers. So they have a legal requirement to keep a professional register of those people competent to practice in that area. So we're regulated by the Professional Standard Authority, so oversee the register, make sure we're complying to the same standards that you would do for doctors and lawyers. So that's a real good step forward. So in order for people to deliver occupational hygiene, deliver services for more than 6 months in the UK, you need to be on that register and approved by BOHS. And approval is based on the criteria set in the competency framework, which I've already mentioned. So that deals with the technical skills and knowledge, but professional practice and competence and experience. So what does that mean broader outside the UK? So BOHS is now the body with legal powers to approve non-occupational non-UK occupational hygiene qualifications for the purpose of practice in the UK. So we're currently accepting US and Australian certs on a case-by-case basis. So reviewing those applications and see if they meet the similar competency as detailed in our competency framework. So in addition to that, we're currently working with the European Platform for Occupational Hygiene. Now they have just been introducing their own competency framework, and that is largely based around the BOHS framework. So we've got confidence that those two will be aligned. So in the future, we're hoping to approve qualifications from the European Platform for Occupational Hygiene for people who are registered on that can then work in the UK as occupational hygienists. Next slide, please. And then specifically around the UK, we're building on this concept to introduce a register for LEV testers, so and for asbestos surveyors, and a register for asbestos surveyors. So that's really about people employing this service provision, having confidence that they can go to register and understand the level of qualifications that individual or company have. So it's got confidence that being provided to the right standard and service. Next slide, please. And then finally, I was just going to finish off with some information around technical guidance. So there's been a lot of people working behind the scenes to develop and publish technical guidance. It is a big and a mammoth task to do that, but we are starting to see a lot of those come to fruition and be publicised recently. There's a bit of work a while ago to pull all the technical guidance into one location. The QR code is where you can access that on BOHS portal. So on that technical directory, guidance directory, we do have historical guidance, stuff where people have used and found useful to reference in from those guidance in the past. We put on there webinar recordings, and we also provide useful links to other organisations and other guidance that are out there that we might find useful. So a while ago, we introduced the guidance on metalworking fluids. So that wasn't a repeat of guidance that's already existing. It was tailored for occupational hygienists and the advice they provide on control of metalworking fluids. So useful to have a look through that. And with that came along of a lot of other tools like audit tools, quality management tools, etc., to use whilst managing metalworking fluids. Next slide, please. And the new ones that have just been released are around an introductory guide to mathematics. This is going to be a series of guides. The current one that's been released is around local exhaust ventilation mathematics, but we've planned to put also out guidance around exposure monitoring, noise assessment and vibration assessment. We've also put out a exemplar noise template for people to reference and use in their working environments, and updated our guidance on formaldehyde and passive sampling. We've also responded to a situation in the UK where there was a growing concern around provision of PPE within the health care sector. And we provided some specific guidance to them on compliance with COSH and specifically around airborne risks. Next slide, please. And then moving on, we have got a future program work around technical guidance, but we're always open to ideas and information around what people think needs to be put into a technical guidance. So please do get in contact if you've got any thoughts and ideas. So in development, we've got currently diesel fume, a minimum sample time calculator spreadsheet, which was donated by Mary Cameron. So that's just being reconfigured for general broader use. Revision of the information for BOHS members on the monitoring of isocyanates in air. So that's just been revised currently to align with the article in the Exposure magazine. And also we've got some momentum on TG15, which is around the technical guide on direct reading devices for airborne surface chemical contaminations. I think with the developing technology and the fast pace of that, then that will be a guidance that would need to be updated on a regular basis. And then finally, something slightly new and different, there's some spreadsheets being developed around control effectiveness. So that can be used by occupational hygienists and duty holders. And they cover different topics like COSH, noise, HAVs and EMF. And it's just really a mechanism to go through all sort of the regulatory and ACOP requirements to do a self-assessment to see whether you're complying with legal requirements. And next and final slide. Yeah, just really to inform you, there has been comms that has gone out in the past, but we are undergoing the strategic review for BOHS for the next 5 years. If you want to get some more information on that, you can follow the QR code. Really good to see all the good work that's been done in the last 5 years. And it will really be interesting to get everybody's thoughts about the next 5 years going forward. So that ends my slides. There's just one more to say. Follow us on social media, get up-to-date information about what's going on within BOHS, and the final slides will give you some links of where we currently post. So, thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything coming question-wise.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Any questions for Adrian? You put them in the chat box or come off mute and deliver it verbally. Any questions?
Silence.
The new technical note on direct reading instruments sounds really interesting. I've done something similar within BP recently on benzene real-time devices. So yeah, maybe I'll catch up with you, Adrian, and see if I can be of any help at all on that new guide.
Yeah, I mean, we're working very closely with HSC on that, and they do support a lot of our guidance. We've really got a good collaboration partnership with the HSC, so we've got sort of a quite broad technical input into that, but any support and help is always appreciated.
Cool. Okay, so just had one question come into the chat box from Alex. Adrian, will the new BOHS initiative run parallel with the Manchester Uni MSc?
Yes, the answer to that. So okay. We'll be looking to work in partnership with higher professional organisations from an education perspective.
Great. Okay. So in the interest of time, let's move on to our second keynote presentation. This is from Tomas Gabor, and he's going to be talking about microbiological sampling. So over to you, Tomas. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You can just put it on the next slide. Yeah, my name is Tomas Gabor, and I'm an industrial hygienist, just like pretty much everybody here on this presentation, with a little bit of exception that I've done a lot on biological exposures throughout all of my career. So that lets me to sort of build up a little bit more knowledge on the methods that we use when we're assessing biological exposures. And hopefully the point of the presentation today is to give you a brief overview of everything that we can effectively use and when and in what we use in different scenarios. If you can go into the next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So as an industrial hygienist, we have pretty much grown accustomed just to use look at the chemicals and physical hazards in the workplace. But certainly in the last decade, and especially since COVID, there is a lot more emphasis on biological exposures. Think of biological exposure as something as like a dynamic hazard. It's invisible, it evolves, and it's often underestimated. It behaves slightly differently to chemical hazards, which seems to diminish over time, where a biological hazard has the capability of multiplying over time, but its own devices without input from the outside. We come across biological exposures from anywhere from healthcare to waste processing, to construction industry, to indoor air quality investigation. And it is our role as a hygienist to measure them. But not only that, we need to correctly interpret the results and suggest effective controls to mitigate the adverse health effects. If you can, next one, please. Yeah, so when we say biological agent, what do we think? We think about anything that is, we're talking about anything that comes from a living organism or is derived from a living matter and is also capable of causing adverse health effects. So this will include fungi, bacteria, viruses, but not only that, it will be also the byproducts of them, just endotoxins, mycotoxins, or just the pure physical bodies of them. Some can give us infection, some can trigger allergies, and some just are toxic, give us toxicity. Next one. So how do they reach us? The exposure pathways are very similar to the ones to the chemical contaminants. One of the major exposure pathways, as you would expect, is the inhalation. In the most common one in occupational setting. Think of aerosols from water systems or spores from mold contaminated surfaces. One of the pathogens that is almost exclusively uses this particular route of exposure is Legionella bacteria. You're probably all familiar with it. The next way would be direct contact, particularly either on skin or through skin or the damaged mucous membranes. An example is Staphylococcus, which can give us numerous types of skin infections. Ingestion is another type. this is an often secondary route of exposure, and it's especially from hand to mouth contact through contaminated food products. A good example would be Legionella bacteria. And the last one would be vector-borne transfers via insects of animals. Again, very relevant in agriculture or waste processing. Could be examples like Coxiella or Borrelia, who gives us Q fever, or Lyme disease. Good example. Next slide, please. So in industrial setting, which we are all a bit more familiar, we come across biological exposures mainly in composting and waste handling facilities. You can often see thermophilic fungi, which can give rise to high endotoxin exposures. These conditions are primarily very good for development of Aspergillus fumigatus. You probably heard the name before. Then you're also familiar with metalworking fluids, where we can have biofilms of bacteria or fungi in the coolant system. They will release endotoxins and volatile byproducts. Biology, biotechnology, and enzyme production. In the context of this environment, we don't really think about them as a contaminated environments, and that's not really what we're interested in here. It is really the products that these facilities produce, the active biological product, enzymes, hormones, or anything like that, and they can actively trigger responses in the workforce if they're not correctly controlled. Sorry. Agriculture and for food processing. Then we have exposure to grain dust, fungal spores, and they can create really massive exposures in these scenarios, because we're dealing with a lot of grains, a lot of hay, for example, that can, under the right conditions, can get fully contaminated and can result in high exposures. And then can have a healthcare laboratories and facilities where opportunistic pathogens needs to be tightly controlled. Again, these environments will not be highly contaminated, but because we have the presence of very sensitive individuals with compromised immunity, even a small amounts of pathogens can have a significant effect on people. Each of these sectors poses different exposure mechanisms. So the control measures and sampling strategy that we employ, each one of them needs to be fit for purpose. Can we go to the next slide, please? So microorganisms can have different effects on us, depending. So some of them can cause infection, and this occurs when a viable infectious agents are inhaled and starts colonizing inside the body tissue. This is particularly in immunocompromised individuals, and good example is invasive aspergillosis. Secondary, we can get allergies. Many people develop allergic responses to mold spores or fragments of the spores, particularly through IgA mediated reactions like asthma, rhinitis, and hypersensitivity pneumonitis. Then we can, and this is a bit rare, is toxicosis, which refers to poisoning from exposure to mycotoxins. These are chemicals produced by some of the molds, like Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, or Clostridium botulinum, probably heard about that, which produces a well-known toxin. The last one is irritations. Even without infection or allergy, people may experience irritations from exposure to volatile organic compounds, B-glucans from fungal wall structures, or just the non-fibril fragments. Symptoms may include headaches, sore throats, eye discomfort, and such. The type of and severity of the health outcomes often depends on the concentration of the bioaerosol and exposure duration and individual's immune status. So we need to take all of these into consideration. Next slide, please. When we specifically look at fungal agents, we can sort of divide them into two basic groups. Some of them are primary infection agents. So what I mean by that is that if a healthy individual is exposed to these fungi, they can get infected directly. Fortunately, there is only about 5 of these fungi that can cause this, Histoplasma, blastomyces, and others. And fortunately, they are all limited to or endemic to Central American regions, bits of Africa and Asia. So they are not really that common. So why I'm saying is, if somebody tells you that I got infected by fungi or I can get fungal infection, it is actually quite rare. So it's not very common. However, we have something called opportunistic pathogens. Then we have genera like Aspergillus, Candida, Mucorales, which can be found in a lot of indoor environments. They can act as opportunistic pathogens causing disease in humans. But for something like this to happen, you already have to have pretty much very severely compromised immunity. So this would be relevant to anybody who is going cancer treatment, has a diabetes, already has asthma, or belongs to those vulnerable groups like very young children or very elderly people. So they can get infected. But think about it, the immunity is already compromised. Next slide, please. So how do we look at the objective? How do we sample? What kind of methodologies we use? We can have different objectives for the investigation, and therefore that will require us to have different strategies for it, which will then command use of different sampling devices. So, for example, we can make investigations for regulatory, legal, or forensic type of things. Their purpose is to fulfill legal, insurance, or occupational health requirements, like, for example, composting site, healthcare facilities, housing. In these cases, the methodology, sampling media, sampling devices, and compliance limits are usually quite defined. Even with the limits, they tend to be defined. So this makes jobs quite easier for us. But we have a whole lot of situation where everything is a little bit vague. For example, post-remedial verification is another one. We use this to confirm the effectiveness of mold removal projects. In these cases, we can use both culturable, non-culturable methods, but they must be closely matched with the remediation methods. In the context of remediation, we need to be aware that, for example, chemical sterilization via fogging or ozoning may kill the molds, but it does not remove it from the environment. So if you wanna control the infectious aspects of the mold, yeah, that they can be fine. But if you want to control the allergic aspects of them, use the chemical removal methods are not necessarily suitable. And we as the hygienists sort of need to navigate all of this. Other types of investigations are complaints or symptom-driven investigations, the response to occupants' health complaints or visible and suspected molds. We can use non-culturable methods, which are most suitable for the investigations because they are quite quick and cost-effective. We can have a routine indoor air quality monitoring. Okay, so this is happening a lot of in offices, high-rise offices, where companies take on regular monitoring of air quality. If we're doing this kind of investigation, we need something quick, something simple. We don't want to really necessarily want to go into a full-blown IDs of molds at this case. Perhaps I would suggest that in this situation, TVC counts without identifications are probably the best method to use because of its quickness, and we don't really need that much of a detail. Sometimes we need to assess the risk to health. This can be happening sometimes in domestic situations where people are claiming to be exposed or are claiming to be exposed to molds, and we need to come into that situation as hygienists, and we need to put a bit of a sense into it. In these scenarios, we can use both. Well, probably we have to use both culturable and non-culturable methods to get enough data sets to have high degree of confidence in our results. And I'm going to take you now through the different methods as well, so you know what I'm actually talking about. So if you can go down to the next slides, please. So bioaerosol sampling devices, we can sort of divide them into sort of two big groups. One aimed for the viable organisms, and the other ones for non-viable organisms. Viable samples detect living organisms on cultured agar or a culture solution. Non-viable samples capture total particles, for example, or you have them, we use them mainly to show the bioburden, the presence of organisms on certain areas, but we don't necessarily quantify them or culture them anymore. Next slide, please. So one of the examples of a non-viable sampling device is a spore trap. They all look similar, different providers, but they work on a similar principle. They are fast and quantitative, but they don't distinguish viability, which means that they can collect both viable and non-viable organisms. And the interpretation of the results depends on the pattern recognition, on the dominant genera that we've identified on those, and the comparison between indoor-outdoor ratios and the particle morphology. As I said, they are very quick to analyze. They capture the total fungal load in the air, and they will also capture any other particles that are floating around. There is no incubation needed, so you can get results very quickly within 24 hours if you need to. And you do generally indoor-outdoor comparison on those. They're also not very sensitive to overloading. I'll explain a little bit later on. The disadvantages of them is that you can't really do much of an ID from them. Generally, you define fungal groups, about 20 different groups of different fungi genera like Basidiospores, Ascospores, or you can pick up Penicillium, Aspergillus type of spores, Cladosporium, and Stachybotrys. You can all see on those. So about 20 different groups, which is enough for you to tell whether the particular building has a problem or doesn't without going into the costs of individual IDs. Yep, next slide, please. More traditional method is the viable sampling method, which use impact or to deposit microbes on agar. Normally, we would use for fungi, we would use malt extract agar, potato dextrose agar, cybrodextrose agar as a standard media. For bacteria, we would use trypton soy agar as a media. Results are typically expressed per colony forming units per cubic meter, as opposed to the spore traps, where we express them as counts per cubic meters. It's physically spores. Colony forming units is not a spore. Colony forming units, it gives rise from. It technically should originate from one spore, but it doesn't have to be the case. This culturable method is highly informative. But it has a problem that it can underreport to the selectivity of the media. So each mold that is present in the environment likes a certain condition, a certain media to grow on, and it might not necessarily like the media that you select to use, and therefore you will always underreport. When we compare, you can't really directly compare also the culturable counts with the spore counts, because they are looking at two different things. The culturable counts will always be much lower than the spore count, which takes also which samples also the dead ones and live ones. The culturable will naturally not collect any of the dead spores or show any of the dead spores. So the advantages of this method that it quantifies the viable organisms, and you can do a species identification if you need to. And there are certain instances that this is quite advantageous and might be required. And these methods have been used for a long period of time. They are standardized for clean rooms, pharmaceutical use, for hospitals environments. They have their purpose and they are very useful. As I say, they don't detect non-viable spores, and they also tend to be biased towards fast-growing organisms. So, and if you do a lot of these, you will notice that you sort of getting the same kind of molds all the time. The Aspergilli, the Penicillium, Cladosporium, Alternaria will be cropping up a lot of the time. And the slow-growing mold, which we often encounter in indoor environments under really wet conditions, like Stachybotrys, the toxic black mold, and Chaetonium, you will never see them on these spores on this media, because they take a long time to develop, and by the time they start growing, the analysis is already completed. Next one, please. We can also use these culture methods, which I just mentioned, the culture plates. We can also use them in a passive mode. What that means that sometimes the biosamples are not available, or we can technically sort of cheat a little bit using them just by exposing them in the indoor air. I wouldn't recommend to do it as a professional, but sometimes it's okay. But it has to be justified. Usually I would recommend that if you decide to do this sort of passive method for culturing plates, you need to keep in mind that you need to expose them for the same period of time. And this is the critical factor. So if you typically half an hour exposure under normal conditions, typical house investigation would be enough to give you enough molds on that you can do some analysis from that. But just keep it exposed for the same number of time, or same duration of time. Next slide, please. So other devices, and these are a bit more complex, are impingers. They use liquid-based collection method, and they are excellent for bacteria, endotoxins, and viruses. The liquid medium captures fragile organisms very well, but we need to be careful about evaporation and contaminations that can be a concern. Also, we need to probably use a chilled transport media to transport these kind of samples. The advantages of these samplers are that they're not so prone to overloading, and you can do culture and molecular method analysis on these, so which becoming much more cheaper and easily available to us. Disadvantage of that may be that we get a little bit too much information, and this makes it difficult to make an interpretation out of that. We can do high resolution sampling of these, and as I say, they are suitable for fragile organisms. Disadvantage of it is that it's a bit more complicated setup, and you need to have a little bit of practice to correctly set it out, and then they can be a little bit time sensitive when it comes to correct handling of the media. Next slide, please. Another type of sampling sort of device is swabs. These are quite ideal for hidden growth behind equipment, something that is not accessible, and we use them mainly to verify a presence of a target organism. They could be used in post cleanup verification quite effectively. Routinely, we use them for confirmation following a sewage cleanups. So then, in this particular case, you can target fecal streptococci, fecal enterococci, or E. coli as a target organism. Pick it up on a swab, and if you get a positive result, you can then say that no, we can still detect these organisms. Therefore, the area needs cleaning up again. Good practice is to use as you can see in the image, some kind of a template, so you can quantify the amount of bacteria or amount of the fungi in per square area. But if you're just doing a confirmation of a species, this is not strictly necessary. The advantages of them, they are very good for sampling from irregular surfaces, or if you just want to confirm a species. It's a semi-quantitative method. Next slide, please. Many of you have come across these Roder samplers. The contact plates, they're ideally used on flat surfaces, and they are good for hygiene verification. They are best used on surfaces where you would not expect high levels of contamination, such as in hospital settings or food preparation areas, potentially ventilation ducts if they clean. The issue is that they can be easily overloaded. I would not really recommend they use it in a normal settings, which is not regularly cleaned or sterilized, because all you're just gonna get is just completely covered by molds by the time you get to analyze them. So you wouldn't get really much of a data on that. You can express the result. They provide the number of colony forming units per a surface area. These samplers come in 55 millimeter sizes, 90 millimeter sizes, so you can choose ones. But they are good for relatively rapid hygiene check, but in a clean environment. They only work on flat surfaces, and they pick up only viable organisms themselves. Next one, please. These tape lifts, they are most useful to provide supporting evidence on active colonization on surfaces. We use them in conjunction with air sampling, and it is really when we investigate in mold exposure complaints, or we want to verify that items of furnishings are colonized and require disposal or deep cleaning, they can be typically analyzed to a genus level if needed. But the important part of the analysis is really just to confirm the active growth of the contaminant in that particular area of investigation. We wouldn't necessarily express the results per area as such. When we take in, and if you're ever going to be using them, just be mindful of the analysts who work on the other side of these. We would generally try to take collect a good sample, which means a lot of material on the tape leaves. But keep in mind that this is analyzed by direct microscopy directly. No sample is transferred from this. So if you take a lot of sample on this, the microscopists will simply not be able to see anything. It's just going to be a massive bunch of blackness in there. You won't be able to recognize anything. So less is better for this, and by less I mean you can barely see that you have collected something, scattered every now and there. That's a good sample. Something that is heavy contaminated, it's going to be very difficult to interpret. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at this. How do we design a sampling plan? We always have to start with the question why, let's say, and ask it several times. Why am I doing this, and what am I trying to establish here? What kind of a data do I need to prove whatever the client wants? Because that will depend on the sampling strategy. We need different numbers. So is it, for example, a complaint driven? Is it a post remediation verification, or is it a part of ongoing monitoring? Once we define the objective, we can select the correct method and ensure representativeness of the samples. And when we collected the samples, always we need to capture the supporting data like location, the activity levels, environmental conditions, because we're dealing with live organisms. So we need to definitely record anything that can have a potential impact on that. In terms of the domestic investigations, we want to record whether the rooms have been ventilated, whether there are animals, are there plants that can be contaminated, is the owners doing composting, do they have a fish tank in there? Things like that. Has they done vacuuming? And especially when we do investigation and we know that we're going to be sampling for molds, we will notify the clients, don't do anything that is not normal, that does not represent normal living. Definitely do not vacuum before we come to that, because that would massively skew the results. So all of this data needs to be correctly recorded. Next slide, please. So duration and volume must all align with the sampler sensitivity and expected concentration. Culturable samplers are very sensitive to overloading, and therefore multiple sample volumes may be necessary. So if you overload your sample, the analyst won't be able to count them correctly, and typically upper detection limit for a plate count is in the region of 250 to 300 colonies per plate. So for plate sampling, you would typically sample for about 1 minute, collect about 100 liters of air in a normal situation. If you are working on a composting site, you might go down to 20 liters a minute. In a sterile environment, in a clean room, in a hospital sterile room, we're talking about operating theater here, that you can go up to 1 cubic meter of sampling. This is very rare, but you would still not overload the sample. But anywhere outside in these kind of unique environments, you're talking about 100 liters of max on these samplers. If you're dealing with the settle plates, like I mentioned, exposure for 30 minutes is good enough to get the data. In terms of the spore sampling, that the method I described first, we usually sample between 1 to 10 minutes and collect between 15 to 150 liters of air. And you need to do the judgment based on the level of contamination. So for example, the outdoor sample, 10-minute sample is okay. Typical indoor office investigation, those 10-minute samples will be fine. But if you enter a highly contaminated area and that you have a square meters of mold, or some kind of activity has been happening on a building site and mold has been removed and handled, then you want to go down to maybe 2 minutes. So you need to make the judgments. They are not as sensitive as the viable to overcoding, so you should be okay if you overdo it a little bit. But still, you want to make the life of the analyst a little bit easier, because if you provide a good sample, you will get a good result. That's important for you. With the impingers, we can typically sample anywhere between 50 to 60 minutes and collect anywhere from 50 to 300 liters of air through it. And they are typically reserved for high risk or special environments, biological laboratories, healthcare settings, or where high resolution sampling and molecular analysis is required. In terms of the location, we typically select the sampling location in relation to human occupancy. So think about center of the room, desk height, bed height. When you collect outdoor samples, we collect them from away from any kind of potential contamination sources, so away from bins, away any composting areas, away from building envelope. Typically about 3 meters gives you into the area where there is a free air movement in those areas. So you want to collect that. Specialist situation maybe when you, for example, in a high-rise building. So in this case, let's say you are on the 15th floor, you're doing an assessment there, and then I would collect the outdoor sample on the balcony of that, because the air quality or air characteristics or load on the level of the 15th floor will be very different to your baseline on the ground floor. So you need to take all of this into consideration where to collect the samples. Sometimes you take them from the outdoors, sometimes you take them from a non-problem areas. Non-problem areas are good to use, but sometimes difficult to find. In a context of a typical domestic environment, typical house, finding a non-problem area will be very difficult because the air mixes quite well between different rooms, and you couldn't really say that one room does not affect the other. When you're doing in an office building, this could be more easily achievable, especially when they're quite big and you can go to the other side of the building on the same floor. Then you can identify a non-problem area, which will be better, potentially a better baseline than the outdoors. Or you can do both. Next slide, please. So in the context of indoor air quality investigation, remediations, or risk assessment, there are not really a safe limits. So we need to interpret the results contextually, not necessarily numerically. Interpretation requires often a pattern analysis, identifying the dominant genera, which can guide us to the source. So, for example, if indoor Aspergillus levels exceeds outdoors levels significantly, we can suspect indoor amplification. Order of a magnitude elevation is a good guide between indoor and outdoor sample, is a good indicator of abnormal conditions. And this is what we're really aiming for, because we're going to be talking about thousands, 10,000, sometimes even millions of spores. And the bigger the difference is between the control and our samples, the more confident we can be in our statements. In terms of the impaction samplers, which yield the airborne viable counts, colony forming units per cubic meter, we need to be aware when we're designing a sampling strategy, especially when we want to go into the identification to the species level, that this can have quite a significant cost implications. Laboratories will generally charge you anywhere between 20 to 40 pounds per isolate on a plate. And based on experience, we generally pick up maybe 3 or 4 isolates on each plate. So as you can see, that this cost per culturable sampling with full ID can escalate very rapidly, and especially when you start taking multiple volume samples, and it can go into thousands. So selection of the correct method is very important when you're pricing for a project. Also be aware when you're getting results from laboratories, when you're collecting your plate samples using biosamplers, just be aware that every biosampler comes with a correction table, which you need to use to correct the results. The laboratory itself will not have this correction table available to them. So they will just report, if you've given them a volume per cubic meter, they will do that. But you yourself need to apply the corrections. And these corrections can be quite significant. These are statistical corrections that the manufacturer of the equipment has calculated. The correction factors for small counts, let's say up to 20, are negligible, maybe nothing. But when you get to a couple of hundreds, suddenly you will end up with 3 or 4 times the multiples that you were reporting. So just be aware of this when using them. Spore trap measure total spore counts, so we don't really need to do corrections of these. They capture both viable and non-viable organisms, but the results are limited to genus levels or fungal groups. But as I mentioned, we can pick up the Stachybotrys, the important ones here. Tape lifts, we use them for genus. We can use them for genus identification or just verification of a presence or absence of an organism. Similarly, swabs are used for either identifications or a presence of absence. Contact plates typically used for verification of cleanliness of a surfaces that are meant to be really clean. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. When it comes to interpretation of the results, we use a similar composition principle. So indoor air samples should represent the background samples in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the genuses or species distributed. And as I mentioned before, that the bigger the difference, the more confident we can be in our statements. Interpret the results comparatively between indoor or outdoor, or indoor or a problem, a non-problem area. Next slide, please. As in other aspects in occupational hygiene, we can apply hierarchy of control in these cases as well when we look at the whole problem, and it applies quite nicely. So what it means in terms of elimination and substitution, we would have to fix the leaks, remove the contaminated materials. Under engineering controls, we can isolate the sources, we can ventilate, we can filter them. So that administrative controls, we can handle this through training, cleaning, and maintenance of ducts or surfaces, ventilation, air conditioning units, and such. And the respiratory protection, this is very important when we have to handle cleaning of the agents, so use the correct respirators, the gloves to prevent exposures. Next one. I think we're coming actually to an end of it, end of the presentation. So again, you work in the industry everywhere, every single one of you, so you might be coming up across different types of exposure. It would be interesting to know what you've seen yourself and what you had to handle. If you have any situation that you would like to discuss, just bring it up and we can talk about it. Yeah. I suppose this is the question part of the presentation. If you have any questions, just please fire them away.
Brilliant, great presentation, Thomas. Very interesting, and something not all hygienists get involved in very often. So I think I definitely learned something there today. Do you have any questions for Thomas?
We will be involved with this more. We will be involved with this more and more, because this is coming. We can see that the occupational hygiene practice people are asking us all the time to come and do these assessments. So we definitely need to clue up on this, all of us.
Okay, so we've got one in the chat box from Gordon. Thanks, Thomas. A very thorough, with important points and tips for practical application, interpretation of results, both basics and specialized, valuable insights and recommendations. Much appreciated.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Any other questions or comments for Thomas?
Okay, good.
No. Oh, yeah. Cameron, go for it, Cameron.
Yeah. Hi, Lee. Hi, Thomas. May I ask a question?
Please go for it.
I'm not sure I will be able to answer, but I'll try and do my best.
Yeah, I hope you will do. So, Thomas, it's related to biological monitoring, and we are currently focusing on some HVAC biological monitoring, our HVAC ductwork biological monitoring. And because we see some correlation, some trend connected with raising of upper respiratory infections on different our offshore facilities, yes, and with aging of our platforms and HVAC system on these platforms. So we don't know, we cannot confirm that this is connected with each other, but in this regard we are focusing on sampling, on biological sampling, and going through it. And I want to ask you what you can suggest as a most effective for biological sampling of air flow within HVAC ductwork.
So you can have a look at two aspects of this. Is there a contamination present in a ductwork? So that's one of the things. So in that case, you can do either viable and non-viable sampling through spore traps or the culture plates. Spore traps might be a little bit better because you don't know, because ductwork can be quite extensive. So it could be a massive load coming through it. So your culture plates can get overloaded. So a bit of a hit and miss, but both methods will basically tell you enough whether there is a contamination in the ductwork itself. The other way of looking at it, you can look at how clean the duct itself is. And then in that case, you could do either swab testing, but there was a UK method, and I believe it has been withdrawn by now, called TM26, which basically addressed this particular issue, how to assess cleanliness of duct works using a biological sampling. And that particular method utilized exactly the contact plates within the ducts, and it also had its own limits. But it has now been removed, so it's a historic one. But clean duct, especially after remediation, shouldn't really have any much of microorganisms. Certainly, when we did the assessments under those methods, we haven't seen much contamination on the surfaces from culture plates. So you could still devise your own methodology using these methods to ensure and to provide that there isn't actually much growing on that ducting.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Could you please tell me again the number of methods which you mentioned?
It was called TM26.
TM26.
Tango Mike 26, but again, it's been withdrawn. But that should hopefully lead you to the replacement, but it might not necessarily limit. But anyway, so it could be a good starting point.
Can be reviewed. Maybe something useful can be used from this method.
It will certainly give you a guidance on how to collect samples correctly. And
great. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lee.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cameron. Any other questions or comments for Thomas or Adrian? No. Okay. So unfortunately, we've not got enough time to go through the WHO climate change and heat stress report. I have put a link to that report in the chat box, and maybe we can have a look at that at our next Africa region webinar. And also the slides on the new benzene OELs in America and the EU. We won't really have time today to give that justice. So we can roll that over to our next Africa region webinar. So in the last few minutes, what I'd be really keen to hear, from the people on the call is what would you like to see at future webinars? So if there's any particular topics you'd like to see included, and to hear your suggestions on how we can grow the BOHS Africa region community even further. We've got 3 minutes left now. I'd really love to hear your suggestions on either in the chat box, or if you'd like to come off mute. So now's your chance. So yeah, are we able to share the slides? So I think the slide pack, I can work with BOHS. I'm sure we can make the slide pack available. This recording will also be available, but we can make the slides available separately as well.
Yeah, hello. Can you guys hear me? This is Matthew.
Hi, Matthew. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, how are you? Hi, Adrian. Hi, everyone. Great presentations today. Thank you very much as well, Thomas. Thank you very much for this great initiative and the support BHS is having in Africa. I think my feedback would be, this is good stuff for capacity building and knowledge sharing for everyone. And I'd like to reach out to you, Heffernan, and maybe Adrian after this, how we can have more participation from the region. I don't see enough people, and I think it's a great learning opportunity. So I'll reach out to you and see how we can grow this community.
That would be great, because it's a key aim. This is our second only webinar for the Africa region. Certainly keen to partner and to grow this community as much as we can. So and to have presenters from the Africa region and from the hygiene associations within Africa would be absolutely great to have presenters from them at future sessions, and be great to have Workplace Health Without Borders as well at a future session. And I see connected to that, Gordon's made a post around suggestions, any proposed partnerships in the pipeline. So we have had a recent success on that. So we had our inaugural call last year. And as a result of that inaugural Africa region call, we had contact from OHS Pro Services in Kenya. And as a result of that, BOHS partnered with that annual hygiene conference in Kenya. And we actually had one of the BOHS boards present face-to-face at that conference, as well as help with marketing and promotion of the conference. So that's one example of where we have partnered with a local hygiene association in Africa, and it's been a win-win for both organisations. So that's just one example of how this type of call could lead into bigger and better things. But certainly, it's just the beginning. We need to grow it and make it bigger. So we've got a comment from Cameron. It'd be great to hear about the practical applications of AI in industrial hygiene, as well as latest practical control measures available to prevent exposure to physical, chemical, biological hazards. So yeah, AI is definitely an interesting topic, and we can certainly put that on the agenda for a future call. Whether it's the Africa region call or one of the other UK regional webinars, I think there has been one on AI in the recent past, and so I believe if it's an online webinar, I think anyone can dial in, no matter where you're located, what part of the UK or overseas. So that takes us to time. It's been an hour. Thank you for dialing in. Thank you to our presenters, Adrian and Thomas. Thank you for your participation and dialing in. If you do have any feedback, please do contact me directly. Say we'd love to hear your suggestions for future topics, and importantly, how to grow this community. And look forward to seeing you on the next regional call. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.